I've been a park ranger at Sequoia National Park for going on 12 years now. The job's mostly what you'd expect: trail maintenance, visitor education, the occasional black bear getting into someone's cooler. But in the summer of 2019, I had an encounter that still keeps me up some nights. It was late August and I was stationed at a remote cabin near Wolverton Meadow. The place was built in the 1930s, solid log construction, one room with a wood stove and a cot. No electricity, just a Coleman propane lamp and my Motorola handheld. The nearest developed campground was a good 4 miles away. At night, the temperature would drop into the 40s, and you could smell the pine resin strong in the cold air. That particular night, I'd finished my patrol around sunset and made myself some dinner on the camp stove. Canned chili. I ate outside, watching the last light fade from the sky, feeling that dry mountain cold settling into my bones. By 9 o'clock it was full dark and I was ready to turn in. I was sitting on the edge of the cot, unlacing my boots, when I heard footsteps outside. Not animal footsteps, human footsteps. They were walking on the gravel path that led to the cabin, slow, deliberate, getting closer. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The footsteps stopped too. I waited, but all I could hear was wind moving through the pines and the faint creaking of branches. I figured maybe it was another ranger, though I couldn't think of any reason someone would hike out here this late without radioing first. I called out. No answer. Just wind and the sound of my own breathing in the quiet. I stood up, still wearing one boot, and grabbed my maglite. When I opened the door and shone the light around, there was nothing. Trees, shadows, the gravel path leading back toward the main trail. I told myself it was probably a deer. They can sound surprisingly human sometimes in the quiet. I went back inside, finished taking off my boots, and lay down. But I didn't fall asleep right away. The cabin felt colder than it should have. About an hour later I heard them again. Same slow footsteps, but circling the cabin this time. I sat up and reached for my flashlight, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. The footsteps stopped directly outside the door. Then I heard breathing. Heavy. Wet. Like someone who'd just finished running. The air inside the cabin suddenly smelled different, sour, like old sweat and something else I couldn't place. I should have radioed for backup right then. Looking back now, that's what I should have done, but instead I called out again, louder this time, identifying myself as NPS Ranger and asking whoever was out there to show themselves. The breathing stopped. Then I heard fingernails scraping against the wooden door. Not knocking. Scraping. Long, slow drags from top to bottom. I grabbed my radio and keyed the mic, calling dispatch. Static. I tried again, hands shaking now from the cold, or maybe not from the cold. More static. The Motorola had been working fine earlier, but now all I got was white noise. I switched to my sidearm instead, a .40 caliber Glock 22 that I'd carried for 6 years and never once drawn on duty. The scraping stopped. I waited, pistol in hand, feeling the weight of it. Then footsteps again, moving around the side of the cabin, crunching on the pine needles and dry leaves. They stopped at the window, the single window on the east wall. I didn't want to look. Training tells you to establish visual contact, assess the threat, maintain cover. But every instinct I had told me not to look at that window. The cabin was so quiet, I could hear the propane lamp hissing. Still, I had to know. I raised my flashlight and shone it toward the glass. There was a face pressed against it. It was human, or it had been once. The features were wrong. Eyes too wide, mouth stretched into something that wasn't quite a smile. The skin looked pale and waxy in the flashlight beam, and there was condensation forming on the glass from its breathing. It was staring at me, not moving, not blinking, then slowly it tilted its head to one side. I fired a warning shot into the ceiling. The sound was deafening in the small cabin, and I felt the concussion in my chest. The face vanished from the window. I heard footsteps running, crashing through the underbrush, moving fast and getting farther away. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the cot with my back against the wall, pistol in my lap, flashlight pointed at the door. The cabin stayed cold, and I could still smell that sour odor. When dawn finally broke and I could see gray light through the window, I packed up my gear and hiked out. The morning air was clean and cold, and I could see my breath. I radioed dispatch as soon as I got signal. They sent another ranger to check the cabin. He found scratches on the door, deep ones, like someone had used a knife or broken glass. The window had smudges, handprints visible in what looked like grease or oil. He said the cabin smelled strange too, like something had been living in there. They never figured out who it was. No missing persons reports matched. No other rangers or campers reported seeing anyone unusual. The footprints outside were too smudged to make out clearly. I requested a transfer after that. I still work at Sequoia, but I don't do remote cabin assignments anymore, and I never go out alone at night if I can help it. Sometimes late at night when I'm closing up the visitor center, I think I can hear those footsteps on the gravel outside, and I wonder what would have happened if I hadn't fired that shot. If I'd just stayed quiet and kept looking at that face in the window, I don't think I would have made it to morning. I worked as a seasonal ranger at Olympic National Park in Washington State during the summer of 2016. First year in the service. I was assigned to the Hoh Rainforest area, one of the wettest places in the continental United States. Over 12 feet of rain a year. The Hoh is unique. The forest is so dense you can't see the sun once you're a few hundred yards in. Everything's covered in moss, the trees, the ground, even the rocks. The air always feels heavy and damp, and it smells like wet earth and decay. The moss deadens all sound. Every direction looks exactly the same. Step off the trail, you can get turned around in seconds. In late July, we got a call about a missing hiker. A woman named Sarah Chen had gone out alone on the Hoh River Trail, planning a day hike to 5 Mile Island. She was experienced, had the right gear, filed her route plan with us, but she never came back. Her husband reported her missing when she didn't return by dark. We started a search that night. The Hoh at night is pitch black. Flashlights barely cut through the fog that rolls in from the river, and you can feel the moisture on your skin, cold and clammy. We found her pack the next morning about 3 miles in, not dropped or thrown aside, placed in the middle of the trail, zipped up, leaning against a nurse log. Her water bottle was still clipped to the outside, half full. Her phone was in the side pocket, dead. I remember thinking that was strange. If she'd gotten injured or lost, why would she leave her pack behind like that? So carefully arranged. Standard protocol says you mark the location and expand your search radius from that point. We spread out in a grid pattern. I was paired with a senior ranger named Marcus, 20 years with the park. We moved slowly through the underbrush, calling Sarah's name every few minutes, our voices getting swallowed by the moss and the fog. About 100 yards off trail, I found her jacket hanging from a low branch, almost like it had been placed there. Marcus radioed it in. We kept searching, and I could feel the damp seeping through my boots. 50 yards farther, we found one of her boots. Then the other boot, another 20 yards beyond that. She was leaving a trail, but it wasn't heading back toward the parking area or toward any of the campsites. It was going deeper into the rainforest, toward a section where there were no marked trails at all. Marcus and I looked at each other. He had this expression I couldn't quite read. He told me that in all his years, he'd seen lost hikers do strange things. Hypothermia makes people strip off their clothes. Panic makes them run in the wrong direction. But this felt different. We followed the trail of items: a sock, her watch, a hair tie. Each one spaced out, each one leading us deeper. The forest got darker, the trees closer together. The temperature dropped, and I could see Marcus's breath in the cold air. Then we found the clearing. It wasn't natural. Someone had cleared away the ferns and saplings, creating a perfect circle about 30 feet across. The ground was bare dirt, packed hard, and it smelled different here. Mineral, like wet stone. In the center was a mound of stones arranged in a spiral pattern. Sarah's shirt was folded on top of the stones. Marcus immediately radioed for backup and told me not to touch anything. We stood at the edge of the clearing, waiting, both of us scanning the tree line. I had this feeling we were being watched. The air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. Looking back now, I should have noticed the trees around that clearing, how they all leaned away from it, like they were trying to grow in the opposite direction. When the other rangers arrived, we searched the surrounding area for hours. We never found Sarah. No body, no more clothes, no sign of where she'd gone after that clearing. The dogs wouldn't enter the circle. They'd get to the edge and then just sit down whining. The stone spiral was documented and photographed. One of the rangers who'd been around longer than Marcus told me he'd heard stories about similar clearings, places where hikers had disappeared over the years. He said the local tribes had legends about the deep rainforest, spirits that would lead people away from the trails. He wasn't joking when he said it. His voice was flat, matter of fact. Sarah Chen is still listed as missing. Her case is still open. Park Service closed that whole section off, said it was due to trail erosion and dangerous conditions. But I know the real reason. I left Olympic at the end of that season, went to work at Crater Lake instead, somewhere with open views and rocky landscapes, somewhere dry. But sometimes I think about Sarah, about the way her belongings were laid out like breadcrumbs, leading us to that clearing. And I think about what Marcus said, that she was leaving a trail deliberately. But for who? For us to find her or for something else to follow? I've been a backcountry ranger at Glacier National Park in Montana since 2014. Most of my job involves checking remote campsites, making sure people have their permits, that they're following bear protocol, usually routine work. In September of 2017, I hiked out to inspect a campsite near Granite Park, late in the season. We'd had early snow, and the air was thin and cold, that dry alpine cold that makes your lungs ache. There weren't many people left in the backcountry. The site I was checking was about 8 miles from the nearest road, tucked into a valley with a good water source. When I got there, I found a tent. That wasn't unusual. Someone with a valid permit camping where they were supposed to be. But something about the setup made me stop. The hair on the back of my neck stood up and I couldn't say why. The tent was positioned wrong. We have specific guidelines about tent placement at designated sites. Away from the water source, door facing the trail in the leveled-out areas we've marked. This tent was set up in the trees, partially hidden, door facing away from everything. I called out, identifying myself as NPS Ranger. Nobody answered. I walked closer. The tent flaps were tied shut from the outside, not zipped, tied with paracord wrapped around the poles multiple times, like someone had sealed it. The knots were tight, deliberate. Whoever tied them knew what they were doing. I called out again. Nothing. Just the wind moving through the pines and the distant sound of water. I started untying the paracord. Took a few minutes. My fingers were cold, and the knots were stubborn. When I finally got the flaps open and shone my maglite inside, the tent was empty, completely empty. No sleeping bag, no gear, no supplies. But the inside walls were covered in writing. Someone had used a black Sharpie to write all over the interior fabric, words and phrases, some of them repeated over and over. It comes at night. Don't let it see you. Close your eyes. The handwriting got smaller and more frantic toward the bottom, and in the center of the tent ceiling in larger letters, it knows your name. The tent smelled wrong, stale, like old fear. I backed out and radioed it in, gave my coordinates, described what I'd found. While I waited for backup, I looked around the campsite more carefully. The fire ring hadn't been used recently. The ground around the tent was disturbed. Scuff marks in the dirt like someone had been pacing, back and forth, over and over. And about 20 feet away I found something that made me stop. Scratches on a tree, deep gouges in the bark, running vertically down the trunk, about 7 feet up. 3 marks, perfectly parallel, each one about a foot long. The wood inside was pale and fresh. I ignored the first warning sign. I should have left right then. I checked the other trees around the campsite. More scratches. Different trees. All at about the same height. All with that same 3-mark pattern. Whatever made them had been moving around the campsite in a circle, methodically, like it was searching for something. Backup arrived about an hour later. A ranger named Joel, 15 years with Glacier. When I showed him the tent and the writing, his face went pale. The color just drained out. He told me to pack up everything, said we were closing this campsite effective immediately. On the hike back, Joel told me this wasn't the first time. 3 years earlier, they'd found a similar tent at a different site, empty, tied shut, covered in writing. The ranger who found it quit a week later. Moved out of state. Joel said the guy wouldn't talk about it, but he'd heard the man had nightmares for months after. We never found out who'd been camping there. No permit had been issued for that site during that time period. No missing persons reports matched. The tent was a cheap, generic brand, impossible to trace. But Joel said something else when we were almost back to the station. He said the writing was the same. Not just similar, the same handwriting, same phrases, 3 years apart. Park Service kept the tent as evidence, but the case went nowhere. The campsite was officially closed, marked as under maintenance on all the maps. I still work backcountry at Glacier, I still check remote campsites, but I always approach with caution now. I always call out before I get close, and I never camp alone anymore, not out here. Because somewhere out there someone was scared enough to seal themselves in a tent and cover the walls with warnings, and I don't think they were crazy. I think they saw something that comes at night. And sometimes I wonder if closing that campsite was enough, or if whatever was circling those trees is still out there, still looking, still knowing your name. I spent 5 years as a ranger at Big Bend National Park in Texas, down where the Rio Grande curves around the edge of the Chihuahuan Desert. Remote country, hundreds of square miles of desert, mountains, and canyons. During the day, the heat is brutal, over 100 degrees. At night, it drops to freezing. The desert air is so dry it pulls the moisture right out of your skin. My last year there was 2018. I was working out of the Chizos Basin Station. Most of my shifts were monitoring radio traffic, coordinating with the handful of other rangers spread across the park. Quiet job most of the time. We'd get maybe 2 or 3 radio calls per shift. Someone checking in from a patrol, reporting a trail closure. Radio protocol was strict. Identify yourself, state your location, keep it brief. One night in October, I was working the overnight shift, midnight to 8 a.m. The station was quiet. Just me and the humming of the radio equipment. I had a pot of coffee going, some paperwork to catch up on. Outside, the desert was completely black. No moon, no lights. Just that vast, empty darkness that makes you feel small. Around 3 in the morning, the radio crackled to life. Static, then a voice. "Station, this is Unit 7 requesting, I need..." The voice was male. Breathless. But something about it sounded off. The words were too slow, the pauses too long, and there was an echo to it, like the person was speaking from inside a tunnel. I keyed the mic. "Unit 7, this is Basin Station. What's your 20? More static. Then, "I don't know where I am. I need help. There's something..." We didn't have a Unit 7. Our rangers were numbered 1 through 5. None of them were scheduled for patrol that night. I felt the temperature in the station drop, and I could see my breath for just a second. "Unit 7, identify yourself. What's your name?" Silence. Long enough that I thought I'd lost the connection. I could hear my own heartbeat. Then the voice came back. Different this time. Calmer, flatter. "My name is Michael Torres. I'm a ranger at Big Bend. I'm lost. Please help me." I knew that name. Michael Torres had been a ranger at Big Bend in 1987. He'd disappeared during a routine patrol in the Chizos Mountains. Never found. There was a memorial plaque for him in the station. I'd walked past his photo every day for 5 years. Looking back now, I should have shut down the radio right then. I didn't key the mic. I just sat there, staring at the radio, feeling that cold air on my skin. The voice continued. "It's dark. I can't find the trail. I've been walking for... I don't know how long anymore. But there's something following me. I can hear it when I stop. It sounds like footsteps, but wrong. Too many of them. I should have shut down the radio, should have logged it as equipment malfunction, but I didn't. My hand moved on its own. I keyed the mic. What's following you? Static, then breathing. Heavy, wet, like someone drowning on dry land. And underneath the breathing, I heard something else. Footsteps, not regular footsteps. A stuttering, shuffling sound, like something with too many legs trying to walk upright. The sound made my skin crawl. The voice came back one more time, barely a whisper. It found me, it always finds me. Tell my wife, tell her I'm... The radio went silent, not static, true silence, like someone had cut the power. I checked the equipment. Everything was working fine, the green lights were on, the power was good. I tried to call back. Nothing. Just that empty silence and the sound of my own breathing in the dark station. I filed a report the next morning. My supervisor listened, made some notes, told me I'd probably picked up some kind of interference, maybe from across the border. He didn't mention Michael Torres. He didn't have to. I could see it in his eyes. He knew the name too. And he smelled the air around me, frowned, and asked if I'd left a window open. I hadn't. But the station still smelled like desert night, cold and mineral. I did some research after that, found out that over the years there'd been other reports. Strange radio calls at Big Bend, always in the middle of the night, always someone claiming to be lost, always cutting off mid-transmission. One ranger in 2003 reported a call from someone who identified themselves as a hiker who'd gone missing in 1978. Another in 2011 heard a woman's voice pleading for help, giving coordinates to a location where they'd found a body 6 months earlier. I finished my contract and left Big Bend, transferred east, somewhere with trees and humidity and lots of other rangers around, somewhere I'd never have to work an overnight shift alone. The truth is, I couldn't handle those overnight shifts anymore. Couldn't handle sitting alone in that station, waiting for the radio to crackle to life. Couldn't handle the thought that somewhere out there in that desert, something was still walking, still calling for help, still being followed. I don't know what I heard that night. Equipment malfunction, someone playing a prank, atmospheric interference. Pick your rational explanation. But I know what it sounded like. It sounded like someone who'd been lost for 30 years, still wandering, still trying to find their way home, and it sounded like they never would. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd answered differently. If I'd told him where to go, given him directions. Would he have found his way out? Or would I have led him somewhere worse?